Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. Around the Nation right here. TWT Nation. Jeff Waldorf here with you on this Wednesday evening. It is it's hump day, man. Let's ignore the camel jokes and just dive right into it, huh? Okay. So we got an interesting show for you guys today. And I say that because there's a lot of things happening. We have, of course, a couple of fun Trump story, or one fun Trump story anyway, that has to do with a poll about if Republicans feel embarrassed about Donald Trump. I think you're going to love that. Then we have Frank Luntz and an elevator. That is an interesting story, so I actually love that. It's probably my favorite. Then we go into the assistance, Democrats actually helping Donald Trump to retain spying powers. So that's a disastrous vote if you actually care about privacy. Then we have Joe Biden, of course, basically admitting, hey, don't worry, Wall Street. I'm on your side. I'm not going to change a darn thing. Then we have an even more important segment. Are centrists trying to pick a fight between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren? So now that's going to be a controversial, because right now I'm seeing it kind of play out on Twitter and on Facebook, social media, and it is already not good. So I'm going to talk about that. Again, it's a really important story. You guys might not agree with me, but I'm going to try and lay out the best case I can for why we're all being gaslit by the establishment on Bernie versus Warren. So, we'll see if I can make a good enough case for you guys to understand what my thought patterns are on that. And of course, we have time. We have the money primary. So a lot of important stuff today. Heavy stuff, getting into primaries and the primary election and all that. So let's kind of dive into it. But before we do, please like and share the stream. Very, very important that you do. Subscribe, obviously, to see all the other content. Very, very important that you do. I'm not sure what else. Join, become a member through the YouTube. What is it? The YouTube membership program, $4.99. So that's not too bad. All right, now let's dive into it. First, let's have a little fun. Okay. President Donald Trump says a lot of incredibly ridiculous things. I think we've documented a lot of that. But, here's some examples. When he was talking about Puerto Rico, he said, this is an island surrounded by water. Big water. Ocean water. And trying to explain why he didn't get help to Puerto Rico when he should have. Climate change. It's freezing and snowing in New York. We need global warming. Foreign policy. Being nice to Rocket Man hasn't worked in 25 years. Why would it work now? Clinton failed. Bush failed. And Obama failed. I won't fail. Which, by the way, later on, he failed. But the stupid thing about that, of course, is that Rocket Man, Kim Jong-un, didn't come to power until 2011. So Clinton couldn't have failed. Bush couldn't have failed because he wasn't there. They were dealing with Kim Jong-il, his father, the man who has no anus and bowled a perfect 300 every time. And of course, who can forget this fun one? Actually, throughout my life, my two greatest assets have been mental stability and being really smart. I went from very successful businessman to top TV star to president of the United States on my first try. I think that would qualify as not smart, but genius. And a very stable genius at that. And in case, of course, Trump being a very stable genius makes you feel bad, he says this: sorry, losers and haters, but my IQ is one of the highest, and you all know it. Please don't feel so stupid or insecure. It's not your fault. Yes. Not your fault. And that's just a small sampling, of course, of some of the ridiculous things that he said or tweeted that, of course, did not go over very well. Now, I know a lot of Americans are pretty embarrassed by the president. I am one. And I'm sure a lot of people are. But what about the MAGA guys? How do the Republicans feel about this? You guys feel any shame about Donald Trump, the things he says or does? Well, apparently they do. Or at least a very sizable majority actually do feel a little bit ashamed. According to a recent poll by Pew Research, 53% of Republicans and Republican-leaning voters say they sometimes feel embarrassed by Donald Trump's comments. 59% are concerned by them. Now, concerned, I guess that's a pretty fluid thing. I guess when he calls the press the enemy of the people, I guess people would be concerned, like, oh my God, that sounds terrible. The press is protected by the First Amendment. Maybe you shouldn't go down that road. That's one way that you could say concerned. Another one, of course, is when he goes on about how he's a very stable genius. Maybe another way to define concerned is, I'm really concerned about that man's mental health. He does not seem like he is old air. Don't know. That would be interesting to find out which context they would be using for the word concerned. But nonetheless, there's a lot of people that seem to be very concerned, and these are Republicans, like I said. Now, there are other adjectives that Pew ran by some of the GOP and GOP-leaning voters. These adjectives included angry, exhausted, and frightened. Well, I think, again, the context seems fairly clear. 32% of GOP and GOP-leaning voters also felt insulted. Wow. Now, this has changed over the years as we have seen the president continue to devolve ever since he was elected. The Washington Post's Aaron Blake had compared Pew's survey to previous surveys, and he found that Trump appears to be worrying Republican voters even more than he had in the past. He points to a February 2017 McClatchy-Maris poll. Now, in that poll, only 12% of Republicans felt embarrassed by Trump's conduct. So, 2 years later, big difference. And you want to know why? Well, of course, the longer you know Trump, the more even the most hardcore MAGA guy thinks, oh my God, just shut up, you idiot. You are not a smart person. No, Jeff, you're wrong. Donald Trump's a genius. A very stable one at that, too. There's some people that are furiously writing that right now. Now, look, the funny part about this is, yeah, of course I'm going to get all these sorts of comments from Trump supporters. But, look, I know the truth. And you know the truth. You can't admit it. Sorry. We know. Pew's survey indicated that Republican or Republican-leaning voters don't feel that they can be honest about their feelings when it comes to Trump's comments, especially in their communities. And that's more so in places where they were favorable to Hillary Clinton in 2016, which I can understand, right? According to the poll, only 37% felt very comfortable openly expressing their political views, meaning that a lot of people are really, really embarrassed. Why? It's because they know. They know Donald Trump's incredibly stupid. They know. The emperor has no clothes. And we all see it. We all know it. So, that's the unfortunate truth. Okay. I'm not sure what else I can say about that. All right. More. Let's go to more fun. Okay. Frank Luntz is a very well-known Republican pollster. He's the guy that would always come up with these Orwellian names to sort of trick people into supporting Republican policies. Like things like the Puppies and Freedom Act that actually throws people in jail or something like weird stuff like that. he'd be like, oh, no, let's rebrand that, right? So let's rebrand, predatory capitalism, for example, our style of predatory capitalism, into free markets. So that, everybody likes freedom, right? Everybody likes free markets. Well, okay, let's do that, right? And so now he has recently jumped on the trend of now calling regular things socialism. Now, let me give you an example, right? In a recent tweet, as he was spending some time in Austria, he tweeted this. I'm at the Hotel Imperial in Vienna, Austria, almost 200 rooms, but the elevator has been broken for 3 days. Please don't bring European-style socialism to America. What do those two things have to do with each other? You are in an elevator in a hotel, and apparently the elevator does not work. And of course, I could just imagine, right? He's like pushing the button. Oh, come on, elevator. Come. Socialism! Dang it! It makes no sense. He blamed European socialism for an elevator that doesn't work. It's crazy. And of course, the internet, nay, the world, had some things to say about this. So I want to read you some of those reactions. Allison Kilkenny says, broken elevators in privately owned hotels equals socialism. Bradley Moss says, I lost track of the number of times the escalators in the DC Metro break, but okay. All right. DB says, this has to be one of the dumbest things I've ever seen on this website. I would agree with that. Prince of Wales Hat says, hey, I'm not an economist, but I think that's not how Vienna hotels, elevators, or socialism work. It's a pretty accurate, I think, observation. And look, as they point out, this is a private company. There's no socialism in charge of the elevators. I mean, come on. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Phil Gould says, please don't bring American-style ignorance to Europe. Ouch. James Fenton says, bloody commies running the privately owned 5-star Hotel Imperial associated with the American-owned multi-billion-dollar Marriott chain of hotels. Yeah, take that. Umar says, this is why the entire world thinks Americans are morons. And in this case, they may have a point. And people like Frank Luntz, Mitch McConnell, really do make us look really bad. Oh, and of course, obviously Donald Trump. And finally, here's my favorite tweet. He says, this is Kelsey Atherton, says, the Imperial Vienna is privately held. But speaking of socialism, congrats on being publicly owned. Nailed it, Kelsey. Nailed it. I'm telling you, man, the Republicans, they have resorted to calling everything, even nonsensical things, socialism. Now, why would they do that? Oh, okay, before I get to that, let me give you one more crazy example. Here, right? During an interview on Fox News Sunday, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said that giving statehood to Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico would lead to what he called full-bore socialism. Let me give you the quote here. Quote, they plan to make the District of Columbia a state that would give them 2 new Democratic senators. Puerto Rico a state, give them 2 more Democratic senators. They plan to expand the Supreme Court. So this is full-bore socialism on the march in the House. Socialism. Hey, actually giving people representation in both Columbia, the District of Columbia, I should say, and Puerto Rico. Socialism. Wow, man. But here's why they do this, right? Because the Republican Party has no plans. They have no policy. They have nothing. The only thing that they do, and this is the only reason the Republican Party, as of now, exists, is to give tax cuts for the rich and to break government so they can privatize it. That's it. That's the only reason the Republican Party even exists anymore. Tax cuts for the rich. That's it. And so when you have nothing, like they don't have a a plan on how to give more people health care. They had a plan on reducing the number of people that had health insurance, but they don't have a plan on health care. They don't have a plan on helping people, who can't afford student loans. Nope, they don't have a plan for that. They don't have a plan for anything other than deregulation for corporations and more tax cuts for corporate America and wealthy people and wealthy donors. That's it. And when they have to start screaming about socialism, which, by the way, they believe in corporate socialism, not actual socialism, which is, of course, public ownership of the means of production. That's what that means. But words have no meaning anymore when it comes to the Republican Party. They have no meaning anymore. And so they just scream out socialism in order to scare old people. If that's all you got, well, then your party is in big trouble. Okay. All right. So now we've got some serious stuff. All right. Okay, here we go. Now, there's some disastrous news for people who care about their privacy, especially on the internet. Recently, the U.S. House of Representatives voted down a bipartisan amendment designed to end the government's most egregious mass surveillance practices, first revealed by whistleblower Edward Snowden. Now, in a final vote to 253 to 175, 126 Democrats joined with 127 Republicans to vote against an amendment introduced by Republican Representative Justin Amash. Now, Justin Amash is more of your libertarian, so he actually does have some principles. I disagree with him on a lot of things, but he seems to have some principles, including the principle of privacy. Now, Justin Amash got together with Representative Zoe Lofgren of California, who's a Democrat, and did this amendment, right? Tried to put this amendment into the basically NSA funding, right? Now, this amendment would have closed loopholes in Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, right? So that's the FISA, right? Now, that section, as it pointed out by Edward Snowden, allowed the NSA to abuse warrantless surveillance capabilities and target emails, text messages, and internet activity of U.S. residents and citizens. Now, look, Republicans, of course, are horrible for voting for this, but you just had 126 Democrats voting to allow the basically bulk collection of American data, and of course allow Donald Trump to have access to it. Now, who else do you think has access to it? Now, among these high-profile Democrats to vote against this amendment was Representative Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. He's also a supposed member of the resistance. Now, he's a gigantic Trump critic, says Trump is incredibly dangerous, that he is an existential threat to the United States. Well, now, if Trump is so dangerous, and I agree that he is, well then, how come Adam Schiff just voted to give him, to continue giving him spying powers on American citizens that he can use to go after the press that he calls the enemy of the people or his political opponents? Not only that, but of course, Adam Schiff also gave President Trump, not gave President Trump, but backs the Trump administration in their attempts to start a war with Iran. So that's who Adam Schiff is, right? So let me give you some more information on Section 702. Now, it basically allows the government to collect and store communications of foreign intelligence targets outside of the U.S. If there's a significant purpose to collect foreign intelligence information, right? So you say, oh, this guy's got foreign intelligence, So what we're going to do is we're going to tap your communications. We're going to collect them, bulk collect them, and so we can review them for any sort of intelligence, right? Now, the thing is, it's so wide, they cast such a wide net that basically a lot of American citizens' information also gets caught up. And so a 2014 report by the Washington Post, by the way, to back that up, reviewed that a large cache of intercepted conversations provided by Edward Snowden revealed that 9 out of 10 account holders were not the intended surveillance targets, but were caught in the net the agency had cast for somebody else. Again, showing how wide that is. Well, now that is deeply problematic. And here you have bulk collection of private communications of American citizens that they didn't get through a warrant. And the president can review that at any time. Now, what if the president wants to start targeting members of the press, journalists, political enemies, under the guise of what? We're just making sure that, that they're not doing, or they don't have foreign intelligence. There's a lot of ways that they can abuse this, and that they have already abused this under the Obama administration. Now, with the Trump administration, it's actually worse. Now, the Lofgren-Amash Amendment would basically require the government to acknowledge the protections in the law, because there were some protections built in, and to explicitly promise not to engage in about collection, which is the wide bulk collection. Now, the practice of collecting communications that merely mention a foreign intelligence target. Now, the mass surveillance, and that's what this is. This is mass surveillance, right? That Democrats have just allowed to keep, the Trump administration to keep doing by voting this down. That's what they did. And some of the people who voted against this amendment are Adam Schiff, Henry Cuellar, Elijah Cummings, Steny Hoyer, and other members of the so-called resistance. Resistance, huh? More like assistance. That's what that is. Now, Evan Greer, Deputy Director of Fight for the Future, had some harsh words for these Democrats. She said, "It's good to know that House Democrats like Adam Schiff are resisting Trump by voting to ensure that he has limitless authority to conduct mass warrantless surveillance." And in a devastating tweet, Fight for the Future said, quote, "House Democrats, Donald Trump is a reckless authoritarian Russian puppet who poses a grave threat to democracy. Also, House Democrats, we should give Donald Trump limitless domestic surveillance authority to target journalists, dissidents, immigrants, etc." Yeah, immigrants is another one, right? Now, the Democrats, Greer also said in a statement, who voted against this common sense amendment just threw immigrants, LGBTQ folks, activists, journalists, and political dissidents under the bus by voting to rubber stamp the Trump administration's Orwellian domestic spying capabilities. It's true. Now, I point out the Democrats mainly for their hypocrisy, right? Because a lot of them use this rhetoric against Donald Trump, pointing out how he's a dangerous authoritarian and just a general bad person. Well, I agree with that. I think he is a wannabe authoritarian. But if you allow Trump to continue having these powers that he shouldn't, to spy in on Americans with warrantless, information, right? Well, then your words are kind of hollow. Now, and look, there's a reason why their words are hollow, because they don't mean anything. Nancy Pelosi has some of the most heated rhetoric against Donald Trump. And yet she won't do anything. Why? Because all she cares about is fundraising off of Donald Trump. I make a lot of money fundraising off Trump. How Trump is so bad. But I won't actually do anything about it. I won't do impeachment despite multiple felonies. I won't hold him accountable. But she'll do this. And everybody, and all the Democrats are like, oh my God, yes. You go, Pelosi, you go. When she doesn't actually do anything of substance. So weak. They don't actually care about resisting Trump, or more importantly, protecting people's privacy and civil liberties. As for the Republicans, I'm not letting them off the hook either. House Republicans added Greer has spent months complaining about the Obama administration's abuse of the FISA, um, and then moved for the status quo when they had an actual opportunity to rein in what they call Big Brother. And you know why they didn't do that? Because it's all politics. It's all show with the establishment Republicans and Democrats. Adam Schiff. By the way, Adam Schiff agrees, like I said, with John Bolton that we should go to war with Iran. I think I mentioned that before. Now, on the other side, of course, are progressives. Now, you had a lot of people voting the right way. For example, AOC, she voted in favor of the amendment. Ro Khanna, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Jamie Raskin. Most of the Justice Democrats, by the way, voted the right way. There is one exception, and that's Rahul Grijalva. I don't know why Rahul Grijalva did not vote for this amendment. I hope he comes out and explains himself why he let the establishment continue to keep their domestic spying powers. I am deeply disappointed in him, and I'm also disappointed that this amendment did not pass. And I want to give credit, oddly enough, to Justin Amash. Now, again, he's somebody that I disagree with on a lot of issues, but on the issue of civil liberties and domestic spying, he's actually one of the good guys, rarely enough. Now, you want to know who else voted in favor of this amendment? These names are going to shock you. And this is the contrast, of course, people like Elijah Cummings and Adam Schiff. Greg Gianforte, the guy who body slammed a reporter, he voted in favor of this amendment to rein in Donald Trump's ability to spy on Americans. And Louis Gohmert. Louis frickin' Gohmert is on the right side of an issue. When Gohmert's on the right side, yet so-called resistance heroes like Adam Schiff are on the wrong side, you know things are super messed up. Okay. I'm going to take a break. We'll come back. We got Biden being honest about who he's going to serve, of course. Then centrists are trying to goad Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders into a fight. And then, of course, we have more stuff, Wall Street. So stay right here. We'll be back. Please, comments, questions, super chats, etc. Go ahead and leave those, and I look forward to reading them after the break. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Around the Nation. Welcome back to the show. Around the Nation right here. Jeff Waldorf here with you. Got a super chat here from Sarge Tech. Says, at Trump's rally, it was the same old story. Hillary this and Hillary that. Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. So, yeah, look, that's Donald Trump's re-election campaign. Run 2016 all over again. Why? Because he's not a smart person. I think you guys already know that. He's got no plan. He's running on what worked. Only elections are different. The field is actually a lot different. And so, look, he does not know what he's doing. So, why? Because he's an idiot and he's also super lazy. Then again, even though those things are both true, still can't get complacent. Because people are still dumb enough to vote for him. Okay. Now, let me get to some comments here. Again, Sarge Tech, with a member comment here, asked, what if we find out if America is behind the tanker bombs just to start a war with Iran? What then? Look, that's a scary situation. But better we all know, because that embarrassment would actually be really good for the United States, because it would maybe prevent us from going into a war. I'm trying to be optimistic. LL says, Nancy Pelosi has a plan, and that plan is to do nothing until nothing can be done. I think that's perfect. Excellent tweet. The Jinxana says, or asks, why does every story have an ugly white guy in it? Oh, wait. And Wesley Weil says, capitalism doesn't reform under corporate conservatism. That's true. And that's kind of the whole point. To keep everything the same, so the status quo, the people who benefit from the status quo continue to benefit from the status quo. Okay. Anyway, thank you for the super chats. Thank you for your comments and all that. Thank you. All right. I knew I forgot to do something. I forgot to give patron shout-outs. But I want to thank the patrons as well, some of you who are watching. I'm sorry I don't have that up, but I want to continue going on with the show. So let's go to Biden. All right. Now, Joe Biden is the ultimate no-change candidate. That's not me saying it. That's Joe Biden saying it. Now, this is what he said to donors at a fundraising trip in New York. He said, quote, remember, I got in trouble with some of the people on my team on the Democratic side because I said, what I found is rich people are just as patriotic as poor people. Not a joke. I mean, we may not want to demonize anybody who's made money. He also said, the truth of the matter is, you all know in your gut what has to be done. We can disagree in the margins, but the truth of the matter is it's all within our wheelhouse and nobody has to be punished. No one's standard of living will change. Nothing will fundamentally change. Now, he was addressing about 100 of the New York's financial elite. Now, this includes bankers Robert Rubin and Roger Altman, both of whom worked in the Treasury Department under Democratic administrations. He said, look, I'm not your enemy. I'm not your enemy. In fact, I'm your friend. Now, let me go into some of his statements, kind of dissect it. First, when he said, look, rich people are just as patriotic as poor people. You guys remember that, right? Well, it's kind of not really an issue of patriotism. It's more of an issue of fairness, right? Rich people make more money and therefore should pay more. Now, if you look at maybe this from a perspective of, hey, it's maybe your patriotic duty to pay the taxes that you owe and to make sure that you pay fair taxes. Well, then, you could say that a lot of the corporations right now and a lot of members of the top 1% are not being as patriotic as people who are in the middle class who end up paying actually more of a share of the taxes than the wealthy in corporations. You could say that because, like I said, the share of corporations and wealthy people paying taxes has actually dropped quite a bit. Now, they still pay more overall, but their share of the pie is getting less and less and less, while the middle class ends up paying actually much more. So, look, his statements to these bankers is basically, don't worry. We might raise taxes on you just a tiny little bit, but we're not going to, you're not really going to feel it all that much, and it's not really going to be fundamental change. I mean, we have to do it, but it's not going to really hurt you all that much. So, no transformational change. I mean, and there you have it. That's Joe Biden, right? If you want no change, Biden is your guy. Now, if you want to return to the conditions that created Donald Trump, Biden's your guy. Now, this is I don't quite remember who actually talked about this. Was it might have been Buttigieg, might have been Beto, talking about what they would do for the tax code if they actually won the presidency. And this is sort of true, I think, of a lot of centrist Democrats, that they would not go back to 35%. That they actually more talked about, yes, raising taxes a little bit, but somewhere like maybe to 25%. The tax rate is at 21% for corporations right now. That's because Donald Trump gave $1.5 trillion in tax cuts to corporations and the rich. Lowered it from 35 to 21. And here's Democrats saying, well, you know what? We like compromise. We like going in the middle. We still want to raise taxes just a little bit, but we're going to raise them to maybe 25%. You're barely going to feel it. Now, I wonder if that's going to enough to make some of these wealthy people, especially GOP donors, more interested in their campaign. Oh, right, it's not. News came out that Biden had attempted to enlist a GOP donor, a longtime Republican donor, to give to his campaign. And of course, that donor had refused, saying, I like Joe Biden. I like where he's going. I like his middle of the road approach, but I'm for Donald Trump. That's Joe Biden for you, right? And so he promised his potential donors that nothing is going to change at all. No fundamental change, no transformational change, no increase of, for example, worker representation like in unions, right? No Medicare for all, no wealth tax to fund, free college. Nothing like that. Just status quo. No change. Knowing that, does anybody out there not understand why progressives have zero interest in voting for Biden? Because this is what he stands for. He stands for nothing. No change. Now, for me, when somebody shows you who they are, you tend to believe them, right? Well, this is who Joe Biden is. He's no progressive. He is a status quo candidate and will bring no change. You really want to put that up against Donald Trump? Knowing how 2016 went? Your call, Democrats. Okay. I think I'm going to switch orders here. Let's go to this one. Wealthy Wall Street financiers have reportedly begun to narrow down their list of 2020 favorites, and it should be no surprise who they are. The New York Times reported last Sunday that 3 candidates are generating most of the buzz among powerful Wall Street donors. Now get a load of who they are. South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, former Vice President Joe Biden, and Senator Kamala Harris. So those are the 3 that are generating the most buzz among the Wall Street elite. Now, the Times wrote, while many are still hedging their bets, those who care most about picking a winner are gravitating toward Mr. Biden and Ms. Harris, while donors are swooning over Mr. Buttigieg enough to open their wallets and bundling networks for him. Now, the Times interviewed 24 top fundraisers and political advisors for that piece. Now, according to the Times, the Wall Street donors opening their wallets for the 2020 race are attracted to Biden's, quote, ideological moderation, which basically means, as he has reaffirmed in recent appearances, that he will offer zero change. Biden is your ultimate status quo candidate. He will not change a thing. Now, these donors are also attracted to Buttigieg's charisma and intellect, which is fine. But what about policy? Buttigieg, what kind of policy? How are you going to help the American people? Are you going to do Medicare for all? You're going to sign the Progressive Pledge? You going to do anything like that? We'll see. But I don't think he will. And then this one's interesting. They're also attracted to Harris's, quote, potential as a possible primary victor, even as she now trails in the polls. Now, why Kamala Harris? Because she ticks off a lot of boxes. She's, young. She's African-American woman. But she's also incredibly establishment friendly, and yet has staked out positions like being in favor for Medicare for all. So that's what that's the positions that she says she's in favor of. We'll have to see, right? And so, yes, this is what Wall Street is saying. We really like, especially Ms. Harris. Now, Harris, I think, will likely rise in the polls as Biden slumps. I can see that happening as the establishment pick. Right now, Biden, and this is all speculation, right now Biden is pretty high up in the polls. But what Biden does is that he usually ends up crashing and burning before the end of the primary. And so I think Harris is probably going to end up taking Biden's spot as at least maybe second or third, right? But anyway, now, Juliana Smoot, who served as the national finance director for Obama's 2008 presidential campaign, said, quote, those are the three. Now, Smoot actually brought in a ton of Wall Street money for Obama's campaign. In fact, he brought in more Wall Street money in 2008 than Republicans. Shocker, right? Now, she said something interesting. She said, if you could roll all three of them into a single candidate, well, you'd have the perfect candidate. Oh, so what kind of things are they looking for? Checks off all the boxes, of course. Young, minority, not Bernie Sanders. Anybody but Bernie, they say. Has ideological moderation. And I think that's what they're most really concerned with. But in reality, of course, what it would be perfect for is zero change. More establishment politics. More of the same, more of the status quo. And that's it, too. None of those candidates are really into actual change. Again, Kamala Harris says she backs Medicare for all, but also says she's open to other solutions. So, what about Medicare for all X? Or, whatever kind of public option plan that they have. And that's basically all they have. Is, we'll just expand the ACA and provide very little change, maybe open up a public option, which is basically a Band-Aid at this point. But again, checking boxes, ideological moderation, that's it. And that's what they think takes to win, by the way. And of course, whatever candidate is backed by Wall Street will end up serving Wall Street. And these candidates, are more than happy to pledge their service in exchange for campaign donations at swanky fundraisers, right? Now, Hamilton James was supposed to meet Mr. Buttigieg, but actually he did meet Mr. Buttigieg. Hamilton James is a vice chairman of the Blackstone Group, and is a top fundraiser. He met with Buttigieg a while ago, and since, of course, there's a shooting in South Bend, Buttigieg had to cancel a lot of his recent campaign events to go do damage control back in South Bend. As far as other candidates and other donors, the short-selling hedge fund manager James Chanos held an event for Biden last Monday, Last Tuesday, Mark Lazary, the hedge fund manager and co-owner of the Milwaukee Bucks, gathered checks from Ms. Harris. Co-hosts of that event included Blair Efron, an investment bank co-founder and an influential Democratic financier, and Ray McGuire, vice chairman of Citigroup. Among those spreading money around is Brad Karp, chairman of the Paul Weiss law firm and a top attorney for Wall Street institutions. He actually had hosted Mr. Biden for a reception last Tuesday. He's also a co-host for Lawyers' Lunch for Ms. Harris that happened that same day. Do you know who's not there? Bernie Sanders. You know who's also not there? Elizabeth Warren. Now, look, to be fair, Elizabeth Warren did say that she was open to taking corporate money in the general. That deeply upsets me. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. It's not an opinion. I mean, the fact that she said she is open with that money, she told Cenk Uygur during an interview with the Young Turks, I would be open to taking corporate money in the general election, but I will not take it in the primary. Despite that, Wall Street still hates both of them. Again, back in January, Wall Street bankers said this about the possibility of a Warren-Sanders nomination. Quote, it can't be Warren and it can't be Sanders. That's the CEO of a big bank talking to Politico and saying it can't be Warren, it cannot be Sanders. It can't be either of those. Now, it's not just Biden, Buttigieg, and Harris that have emerged as Wall Street favorites. There are others. David Adelman, an attorney who represents the financial industry, told The Times that he feels a generational pull towards Beto O'Rourke, or Robert Francis, as I like to call him. Adelman says, quote, it's important to rotate the crops. Ain't that a statement? Wall Street bankers have also donated to Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and Cory Booker, according to The Times. Cory Booker is somebody that I could see taking a lot of Wall Street money. But going back to that statement, rotate the crops. Well, that's how they see this, right? They're basically growing these campaigns, fertilizing them with money, so that they will get a return if one of these people ends up getting becoming president. And you know what we call that? Corruption. Legalized bribery. And it has to end. Okay. So let's go into Bernie versus Warren. So Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, we know, are competing against each other for the Democratic nomination. And so far, of course, they have both focused on a lot of issues. Now, for example, Elizabeth Warren continues to put out policy after policy, sometimes very detailed, while Sanders, of course, puts out his own policy, but is also getting young people behind FDR-style New Deal policies like Medicare for All. So, and of course, explaining what democratic socialism means, right? Now, together, both of them are actually pretty high in the polls. Most polls have Bernie Sanders at number 2, Warren at number 3. And, of course, it differs in some of the states. But generally, that's how it goes, at least when it comes to national averages. Now, this is while candidates like Buttigieg, Robert Francis O'Rourke, and Kamala Harris have actually failed to rise. Now, the question, on my mind at least, is Bernie Sanders going to go after Elizabeth Warren? Or is Elizabeth Warren going to attack Bernie Sanders? Instead of rolling out new policies and hitting Donald Trump as they have been doing. Now, I for one, say yes, let's focus on policy, right? And I hope most of you feel the same. But here's the thing. I think the establishment wants to try to get them into a fight. So now let me explain, right? Now, recently there's been some articles that have come out with some provocative headlines. For example, earlier this month, you had Vanity Fair coming out with this. A lot of Bernie's support seems to be drifting to Warren. As Sanders reprises greatest hits, Elizabeth Warren is surging. Now, again, that happens to be your standard sort of establishment headline. But in this case, it is a little bit provocative And when you think about it, it does kind of sound like they want to pit Warren versus Sanders. Now, in it, they talked to a Democratic strategist and supposed Sanders ally, who was not named, and they said this, quote, "If you had talked to me in 18 or 17 about Warren, I would have said to you, I don't see how she gets to Bernie's left. And she's done it." That's partly sloppiness on his part. His candidacy this time around has ended up being a greatest hits act. What new energy or idea is he bringing to the table? Warren has outmaneuvered him on policy. What new idea or energy? Well, I don't know. Let's talk about Bernie Sanders' embrace of progressive foreign policy. That's something that, unfortunately, Warren is not doing as well on, and I wish he would actually do better. Criticize, Israel and avoid war with Iran. And so those are some problem issues, but I'm not trying to criticize Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders too much, but I'm just trying to be honest about where their positions actually are. As far as this so-called ally of Bernie Sanders, I think whoever that is wrong. Look, in reality, in general, they support very similar policies. Bernie Sanders is on the left of Elizabeth Warren when it comes to Medicare for all. Why? Because she said she's open to other things and has sort of waffled, unfortunately, on the issue of Medicare for all. Campaign finance reform, also something that Bernie Sanders is on the left of Elizabeth Warren on. They're both not taking corporate PAC money right now, but during an interview with TYT's Cenk Uygur, she admitted to being open to taking corporate money in the general election. Now that is, look, that's problematic, and I'm not in favor of that, and I'm going to be completely honest with you. But anyway, there's more. Another article comes out today, this time in Politico. Now, it came out with the title of "Centrists Are Coming Around to Elizabeth Warren as an Alternative to Bernie Sanders." Now, I looked at that, and I'm like, that's bait. It's a trap. It's a trap. Because as a progressive, you see that and immediately think, oh, that's it. Elizabeth Warren is getting all the establishment support. She's going down. Get her. Now, here's the thing, right? She actually is a little bit more friendly to the establishment than Bernie Sanders. However, at the same time, remember what Wall Street said about her. They said, anonymously, a CEO, it can't be Warren, it can't be Sanders. Wall Street does not like Elizabeth Warren at all. Remember that. Besides, this entire article is basically talking to third-way Democrats, right? And, of course, they say, it can't ever be Bernie. Anybody but Bernie, right? We'll even take Elizabeth Warren. Just please, no Bernie. And they, of course, see Bernie Sanders as the biggest threat because he is a little bit more transformational than Elizabeth Warren. They have a different approach. Bernie Sanders says political revolution. Elizabeth Warren says, I'm going to still work within the system, but I do want to make changes. So there's that, right? Now, let me give you some of the quotes here. Actually, this is a tweet from Jim Kessler. He's a co-founder of the Third Way. He said, Elizabeth Warren kills it at Black Econ Alliance Candidate Forum, Love Her Entrepreneurship Fund. Now, when that was tweeted out, of course, the attacks came. Elizabeth Warren, beloved by the establishment, right? Matt Bennett, another co-founder of Third Way, said that set of Sanders and Warren's policies, quote, one is a democratic capitalist narrative, the other is a socialist narrative. And they're further, of course, trying to divide Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, when in reality, they're both democratic capitalists. It's just Bernie Sanders is a little bit more transformational and to the left of Elizabeth Warren. But that said, those are the differences between them. But they're far closer to each other than anybody else in the field is close to them. And that's really, really important. Now, there's more here. This is a self-described moderate Democrat Reagan Gray, who's a healthcare policy and political consultant, who was at a third way conference. He said this, quote, "I don't agree with Medicare for all. I don't agree with free college, but her consumer protection policies are great. I think she has a good infrastructure plan. I absolutely know and believe people are taking a second look at her. She now seems to be getting herself away from the Bernie Sanders grouping. People are taking a second look at her and saying, some of her policies are good. Maybe she isn't like Bernie." So now that is somebody who is a third way so-called moderate Democrat. Now, in reality, again, he is absolutely wrong. She is actually more like Bernie than someone like Cory Booker or Mayo Pete, right? Now, again, there are significant differences on some issues between Sanders and Warren, and those should be talked about, and I actually can't wait for the debates so they can differentiate themselves. But in reality, they're a lot like each other. Now, the differences mainly are foreign policy, right? And now Bernie Sanders is better on the issues now than he was in 2016. He's better on the issue of Israel. He doesn't believe in the U.S. story about Iran bombing the tankers, which, of course, that's backed up by the Japanese. The Japanese are saying, Iran, we have no indication, or we don't believe that Iran attacked our tankers. And so Bernie Sanders says, well, I don't believe the U.S. account either. Whereas, unfortunately, Elizabeth Warren does buy into that. So that is a significant difference. Domestically, however, again, they're very similar, except like I said on healthcare. She's obviously more technocratic, a little bit more wonkish, and less radical. That doesn't mean that she's a bad person, and that doesn't mean that she would not upset the status quo. She would just do it less than Bernie Sanders. So that's really important to point out, right? And so here's what I'm trying to get at. With all that context, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have more in common with each other than the rest of the field. That's why Bernie Sanders is in number 2, and Elizabeth Warren is a close third. Now, the establishment knows that Joe Biden is gaffe-prone, and he might not last. So, why not get behind the slightly less radical Warren, since they are incredibly scared of Bernie Sanders, pump out a bunch of articles, gaslight people, and turn Warren and Sanders supporters against each other in order to try to knock Bernie out? Now, think about it. A lot of my fellow Sanders supporters are already going after Warren supporters and Elizabeth Warren. When that happens, the corporate media picks up on it, and they run with the sexist Bernie bro narrative. Again, that is a ridiculous narrative, but they've got that ammunition now, right? Now, a lot of progressives that I know, at least, have Warren at number 2. Bernie Sanders is obviously their number 1, but they're like, hey, look, Elizabeth Warren, number 2, or number 3 behind Tulsi Gabbard, right? If we end up fighting amongst ourselves as progressives, the media is going to go after us, obviously, as they have, but also Bernie Sanders by pinning more, sexism charges, more Bernie bro crap, and they're going to try to use that to basically knock Sanders out of the race. Now, it's actually starting to work. I mean, you had member of the Justice Democrats, Wahid Shaleed, coming out after Bernie Sanders had tweeted something out. Let me give you the quote here. He said, "The cat is out of the bag. The corporate wing of the Democratic Party is publicly anybody but Bernie. They know our progressive agenda of Medicare for all, breaking up the big banks, taking on drug companies, and raising wages is a real threat to the billionaire class." Waleed Shahid and a lot of these establishment pundits, and I'm not saying Wahid is one of those. Again, I just mentioned that he's Justice Democrat, right? A member of that group. Well, he had a very bad take, because now they're saying, whoa, Bernie, why are you attacking Elizabeth Warren with that tweet? You just call her the establishment? Well, Elizabeth Warren wasn't even mentioned in that tweet. And the entire article was about what the third way wants. And the third way, of course, is saying, we're scared of Bernie, so yeah, we'll be okay with Elizabeth Warren because she won't be quite as bad for us as Bernie Sanders. Now, here's the thing, right? Now, the establishment, the third way, and this is what gets lost. They despise Warren too. She still represents too much change for the establishment. So odds are that if they did manage to knock Bernie out of the race, which I don't think is going to happen, but it definitely seems like the goal here, right? They would turn on her next. And then we would have either Biden, or if he's knocked out, Kamala Harris, Buttigieg, or Beto. Those are the people that were selected already by Wall Street. Those are the Wall Street favorites. And this is what could be happening here. I have this feeling that this propping up of Warren, and that's not her fault, right? I think this is nothing more than a cynical ploy to eliminate first Bernie Sanders and her by getting them to fight and in an ugly way. Now, if they end up fighting, of course, they don't push policy. And of course, where they differ the most is actually policy. But both of their policies are actually much better than anything else in the field. And so, unfortunately, this has already begun, as I pointed out. You have so many, and you just check out that Twitter thread. It's already terrible with progressives fighting each other, Bernie Sanders fans, Elizabeth Warren fans going after each other. It's already started. And that's unfortunate, right? And so they see that as an attack against Warren. Now, fun fact, right? After that tweet, I went and took a look at the headline for Politico. Now, that original Politico headline, right, is, as I told you guys, what was it? Centrists are coming around to Elizabeth Warren as an alternative to Bernie Sanders, right? They stealth changed that to Warren emerges as potential compromise nominee. That's interesting. Why would they have to change that headline? Again, this is Politico. This is the establishment, right? Now, of course, they changed it to, I guess, where it's less provocative, but the damage is already done. Pundits everywhere are screaming, how dare you attack Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders? This is how you lost 2016. As for progressives, there's a quote in that article from the Third Way about how much they love Elizabeth Warren because, she's not 100% on Medicare for all, which is true, and that she's a team player for the Democrats. You guys are going to listen to Third Way? I'm just saying, are you guys going to listen to Third Way? You're going to take what they say at face value? Well, Politico's the establishment, and the Third Way is the establishment. And unfortunately, when progressives fight each other, when they split up, the establishment wins. So for me, look, I want to see Bernie Sanders, I want to see Elizabeth Warren continue to stay focused on the policy and not get into a mud fight. When you separate yourself, when you differentiate yourselves through your policies, well, then that's different. But Sanders supporters, Warren supporters, do not get into the mud. Sanders and Warren are miles away from the other candidates. We should be focused on taking out the establishment candidates, Biden, Buttigieg, Beto, Kamala Harris, all those other candidates, get them out of the field. And then, if Warren and Sanders are the only ones left, then you guys can have a contest of ideas. But right now, the establishment is target number one, not each other. So remember that. That's the only way that we're going to win. Okay. All right. Thank you guys for going around the nation with me today. Please consider becoming a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. Like and share the stream. Like and share our videos too. Really, really helps out. All right, guys. We'll see you guys later. Tomorrow, we'll have another great show. Love you guys. And remember, change begins with you. Good night, nation. We'll see you later. TYT's next.